Hello, everyone. This is Carrie Tresik, and I'll be presenting part 3 of our Agamemnon project. And I've titled my section of this project Agamemnon Sacrifice, Sex, and Slaughter, mimicking the three main movements that you'll see in Agamemnon's story in artwork. This presentation will cover the three main movements of Agamemnon's main storyline, as well as some modern interpretations and some scholarly work about Agamemnon. So, we learned at the start of this semester about the archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, who thought he had discovered the tomb of Agamemnon in some Turkish remains in 1879. He thought he had found the tomb of Agamemnon and this golden death mask as the death mask of Agamemnon. He knew that Agamemnon was a Mycenaean king. Mycenae was said to have been filled with plenty of gold, and it just made sense. However, this has since been disproven as not being the death mask of Agamemnon because it dates about 400 years too early to be the ancient Mycenaean king. Some recent modern screen time adaptations are the movie Troy from 2004. This is a movie that starred Orlando Bloom and Brad Pitt and Eric Bana as Achilles and Paris and Hector, as well as a miniseries that Michelle actually brought to my attention during our research project called Troy Fall of a City, which you can find on Netflix. And specifically, the what I think is the main scene of Agamemnon's story, where he angers Achilles by taking his war prize bride, actually occurs in episode 4 called Spoils of War. If we move into the main movements of Agamemnon's story, we can break his story down into sacrifice, sex, and slaughter. Now, it all starts when Agamemnon is trying to launch a successful campaign. He's been named general or commander of the Greek forces, and he has this fleet of 100 ships trying to make it to the battle, and he angers Artemis, as Jared and Michelle have previously discussed. So, of course, he has to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia, to Artemis on this altar. This is a color version of the fresco that you can find in our Powell text. And in the color version, we see a little bit more of those details that the text is discussing, such as the saffron robes that Iphigenia has been dressed in, as well as Artemis in the deer up in the heavens. What I think was particularly interesting is this fresco shows a softer side to Agamemnon that most of Homer's text in the Iliad and then later Aeschylus's play Agamemnon don't really capture. Agamemnon is known as being a harsh leader and a leader who makes decisions to justify his means and achieve his ends. He doesn't really care about the trials and tribulations of everyone around him for the most part. So I thought it was interesting that the textbook decided to pull a fresco where Agamemnon is shrouded and almost hiding and ashamed of the action that is happening before him as his men carry out the sacrifice. If we contrast that with the next image, which is an oil painting, The Sacrifice of Iphigenia by Perrier, you still see the same similarities. There's still a sacrifice happening. You still have Agamemnon's men helping carry out this ritual. You still have Artemis watching from the heavens, although this time the doe actually looks like a doe, not a stag. And in this example, we have Agamemnon in the background with this red swath of cloth and this crown, and he's much more commanding in this example as opposed to the one right before, where he's hiding his face away and he's really unwilling to look at his daughter being sacrificed, which I thought made for an interesting contrast and kind of the dual side of Agamemnon that exists in artwork. We also have this figure kind of in this middle background, kind of shadowy, who's dressed all in blue. They also look like they're wearing a crown, and they are also more covered. So I'm assuming that this is Clytemnestra, who, as I understand the myth, was not actually at the sacrifice of her daughter. She was told that Agamemnon was going to take her to get married and doesn't find out until after the fact. But this picture pictures her there pleading to the heavens to possibly spare her child. And this is, I think, a significant detail because Clytemnestra uses this sacrifice of her daughter as justification for why she's going to kill Agamemnon at the end of his story. So you not only have the contrast of the character of Agamemnon here, you also have this difference of Clytemnestra being pictured in one, whereas in this fresco, she is nowhere to be seen per the written text. I thought an interesting modern adaptation to this sacrifice story of Agamemnon was from Game of Thrones, season 5, episode 9, The Dance of Dragons, where we have Stannis Baratheon, who's trying to kind of reinvigorate his campaign to be the king of Westeros. And he chooses to sacrifice sweet little Shireen to the Lord of Light per the Red Woman's suggestion. And you have a similarity to this fresco and this oil painting before. You have the men of Agamemnon, or these soldiers of Stannis Baratheon, standing idly in the background or helping put poor Shireen on the pyre as Agamemnon commands this action, if not 100% taking part himself. The second movement of Agamemnon's story, as highlighted by Jared, does talk about this exchange of ward brides in Agamemnon's story. Agamemnon originally took Chryseis as a war bride and then had to return her to serve her father and the god Apollo. So then his eyes fall on Achilles' war bride, Briseis, and he tells Achilles, I had to lose mine, so now I get to pick from the remainders. Even though you've already selected this war bride, I'm going to take her, and she's going to be my woman now, which of course is what stops Achilles fighting. He basically withdraws from the war and sits in his tent with Patroclus. And we see this scene highlighted in Homer's Iliad. And in this scene of Minerva preventing Achilles from killing Agamemnon, we have the argument, or where Agamemnon has stated he's going to take Briseis away, and you have Pallas Athena swoop in, or this title calls Pallas Athena Minerva, but that's the Roman name for Athena. And she's literally gripping Achilles' hair to stop his attack of this king. Moving along in this second movement, because of this Briseis conundrum, Achilles has refused to fight. Things are not looking good for the Greeks. Again, this is picking up in Homer's Iliad. The scene does come up in Shakespeare's play Troilus and Cressida. And for Troilus and Cressida being the title characters, they really have very little stage time. And there's this scene where Agamemnon is walking through the Greek camp, and you again kind of see a softer side of Agamemnon a little bit in Shakespeare's play. He is the ruler who's concerned about his men. They don't seem engaged in the fight, and he's wondering why they look so sallow and heavy cheeked. And Achilles walks through and makes fun of Agamemnon, makes fun of the Greek sources. And Achilles is really painted in a poor light in Shakespeare's play as really cocky and headstrong and not really fighting, but for no stated reason, because Shakespeare does not include the part of the Iliad where Agamemnon has stolen the war bride from Achilles. So you have Achilles kind of being this jerk for no reason, and Agamemnon being the more sympathetic character, which is different than the text that we read in the Iliad. And in this pictorial, we have Achilles being shown as kind of that softer or withdrawn warrior. He's plucking his lyre, as the text states, and Patroclus is leaning kind of with that blue robe next to him on that tent, foreshadowing that he will join the fight sooner than Achilles, because Patroclus has Achilles' helmet on, whereas Achilles wears no armor whatsoever. And then you have the ambassadors on Agamemnon's command, trying to bribe Achilles to rejoin the fight, which, of course, Achilles is going to shun. The final movement that I have in Agamemnon's second movement is the return of Briseis to Achilles to attempt to get Achilles back in the fight. Of course, what's really going to get Achilles back in that fight is when Patroclus falls after he has stolen Achilles' armor, which prompts Achilles to then go take care of Hector, which kind of brings on that climax and conclusion of the Iliad. Iliad does not end with the sack of Troy. Instead, the Iliad ends with King Priam entering the Greek tent, trying to get the body of Hector back for proper burial. The third and final movement of Agamemnon's storyline doesn't occur in Homer's Iliad. Instead, we have to turn to the source Agamemnon, which is the title of a play by Aeschylus. And this is the story of Agamemnon returning home to his wife Clytemnestra, who was the mother of that daughter that he murdered, with his war bride or mistress Cassandra in tow. And this will not end well for Cassandra or Agamemnon. So Agamemnon is welcome home. Clytemnestra convinces him to walk across some purple tapestry or purple cloth, which she then uses almost as a net to hold Agamemnon in place while she and her lover murder Agamemnon. And in artwork, you kind of see two depictions of this murder of Agamemnon. Sometimes he's just reclining in a bedroom type scene after a banquet, or you get the image like what I have included on the left, where he has been trapped in these cloths. That is a similarity between the artwork, is he's still swathed in these cloths, but he ends up in a bathtub where we see poor Agamemnon has been killed with Clytemnestra leaning over him. And then you also see a hint to his children who are mourning in this bottom right-hand corner of this image for the next two plays in Aeschylus's trilogy, which follow the revenge. Agamemnon's son Orestes takes the life of Clytemnestra and her lover with the help of his sister Electra, and then Orestes is then plagued by the Furies for killing his own blood, which resolves in the third play of Aeschylus, which is called the Eumenides, which explains how the Furies have changed from these revenge spirits to spirits of goodwill or beneficial spirits. I've included my works cited here. It's a little bit on the long side because I wanted to cite all of the images that I was including. You can also find these sources on our group's bibliography linked in the module.